discussed items 1, 2, and 3. Direction was given. No reportable action was taken.
I'd like to call the regular meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Here. Councilmember Spriggs?
Here.
Councilmember Bill Bray?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Patton?
Here.
Mayor Janney?
Here. Could you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any agenda change requests for this evening?
Yes, sir.
Let's see any from my colleagues. Move on to Mayor Council reimbursements, disclosures, and community announcements. Ms. Bragg?
I have nothing at this time.
Mr. Spriggs?
Just kind of an update on my work with Metro JPA, which is the Metropolitan Wastewater Commission. There is a major effort underway I've reported on previously for Metro and the City of San Diego to work on a project that would recycle water to a high standard so that it's drinking water. And there seems to be a lot of popular support for this approach, especially given the rising cost of water and the drought conditions that seem to be more and more frequent. We have not yet passed a resolution on this council in support of this approach because of some technical issues, but most of the other municipalities that are members of the Metro JPA have done so, and I imagine we will eventually once some of those technicalities get worked out. So I just wanted to update everyone that we are moving ahead on this effort. It's a major multi-million-dollar effort that will give us and our grandchildren and those beyond water security in this arid region of the country.
Thank you. Mr. Bilbray? Mr. Patton?
Nothing at this time.
I just want to follow up from our last meeting where we had a presentation on some of the management actions being taken down in the Tijuana River Valley. I went to a binational forum today with the Tijuana River Valley Recovery Team and the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and I was able to express our gratitude to both the mayor of Tijuana, one of the council members, and the people of Tijuana. I thought it was very important while everybody else was focusing on what they were going to do next, that we acknowledged that the citizens of Tijuana, along with their leadership, have done quite a bit to help the Tijuana River Valley over the last decade. So I think that we're still pursuing the idea of going down there and being able to, they say something to their council, but because the mayor was there, one of his council members, and many folks from across the border, I thought it was appropriate to make those comments. So just to let you all know. Please.
I really wish I could have been there also, Mr. Mayor, because we've taken these cross-border issues up in the International Boundary and Water Commission Citizens Forum. It's really important work. It's really great that you were able to represent our city there and express the desire for cooperation. And the IBWC is looking for various ways. The next meeting of the IBWC is going to be looking at cooperation between non-governmental organizations on a higher level on this side of the border and the other side of the border, and we'll be getting a couple reports on that. So I get the sense that things are really moving in the right direction.
And that's what the council member from Tijuana was expressing. I mean, I had a little bit of hard time understanding even with the translators, but they're put for a resolution. They really are concentrating now on some of the sediment and the trash problems that come from those canyons that feed down in, at least locally here. So I think they understand it, but I thought it was very important that we recognize they're trying to do something with it, because I think sometimes people forget that.
Mr. Mayor, I forgot when it was my turn previously to since this item is on the consent calendar, but and not on the agenda, to during this part of the meeting ask if the city manager might, when it's his turn, update us on where things stand with the fireworks progress.
I know, Mr. Mayor, I know Candy Unger's on her way down to give an update on her side as well. She should be here in just a little bit.
Well, then what I'd like to do, because there is items dealing with the fireworks on consent, and it would be appropriate if Ms. Unger wasn't able to make it under normal public comments, that we take consent later on in the agenda so that it seems appropriate for comments to be made along with that item. Because otherwise, so, okay, well then I would entertain a motion that we pull items number 2.5 and 2.6 to be taken at the end of the agenda this evening. We have a motion and a second. Can we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, do you have anything from staff? I understand that Chief Clark would like to make a couple announcements about some of the great action that some of our employees have been doing.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council and Manager. I have Sergeant Art Ayala with me, and in the back, Lifeguard 2, Jesus Gonzalez, and Lifeguard Sergeant Jason Lindquist. Mother's Day is a kind of a really neat day for people, but Art's coming to work, and all of a sudden Art has got to deal with a rescue, an immediate need rescue where somebody is wrapped up around the pier and their surfboard is holding them up against the pier, and I'll let Art talk about that in a minute. But the gentleman was so thankful about Art rescuing him and saving his life, he could hardly walk. When Jesus and Art got him to the beach, he could hardly walk. He brought in a gift card to Art with $500. He didn't want to be recognized. He didn't want his name out there. But what Art did is called him back and said, we can't accept this money. And he said, turn it around and use it for scholarships for the junior lifeguard program. So I think that's really a great gift to the city and to our young people. But I want to let Art tell you about that rescue. Coming to work, first thing, right out of the bat.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Council. To me, it's just another day of showing up to work and coming in. It was Mother's Day, coming in for my 7 a.m. shift and showing up a little early. And this is what I encounter. So I get two citizens that are checking out the surf, and they say, Art, there's somebody trapped underneath the pier. And I said, okay. Something you don't want to just deal with right off the bat. I'm still kind of, half asleep. I don't have visual on him yet, but they said he's been there for 5 minutes. He needs help. I said, okay. So immediately I react and I go into the station. I change out into my reds. I grab my rescue tube and fins, and I just start running out. And as I'm running out, I see my other 7 o'clock guard coming in, driving down Seacoast, and it's Jesus Gonzalez, and I just put my can up in the air and just wave it, like, hopefully you see me. Sure enough, he did, and he pulled right in. I jumped into the water. Luckily, it was about 64, 65 degrees, not too bad. And got to the gentleman. We had about 3 to 5 foot surf that morning, and got to him, and he was wrapped around the piling with a death grip. And we had swells coming in, and he's in the impact zone. That's right where the waves are breaking. And with each swell coming in, he's underwater about 2 to 3 feet. And I get out to him, and I was like, what are you doing? His surfboard is wrapped around the other piling. He's clinging onto this one. He's got a death grip on there. And so I reach down. He's still attached through his leash, and I undo his leash, and I said, let's go. And I grab him, and he just falls back into the water. Put the tube around him, wrap him in, and I said, we're not out of the woods yet. Let's get out of here. Current puzzles out. At that time, Jesus is on the beach with the lifeguard unit, and I'm coming in with this guy, and he's dead weight. He's about 6'2", 220 pounds, big guy. And we bring him in, and I get to the point where, hey, put your feet down and walk in. He had jelly legs, and he couldn't. Jesus comes out, and I was winded at that time. Jesus comes in, he grabs him. We drag him to shore, and we put him down and say, hey, you're okay now. And he just flops back. And he's just like, he's breathing, he's fine. We're like, okay, catch your breath, catch your breath. We take him back to lifeguard headquarters. We even throw him in the shower. It's like, okay, you're going to be all right. Catch your breath, catch your breath. And still, he's not calming down. We put him into the med room, and we continue with our assessment. He had a rapid pulse, 128, and his respirations were 28, and we checked them 5 minutes later, and they were still the same, not calming down. Put O2 on him, and Jesus was able to detect lung sounds, and he heard some crackling in his lungs, indication that there's fluid in his lungs. So we rolled the medics, and we did the handoff. They take him to Scripps Chula Vista, I believe it was, and he ended up spending the night in the hospital. And then he came down. He came back about five days later with that card, and he was very thankful and said, thank you for saving my life. And I said, okay, what were you doing? And he said he's been surfing for a long time, and he just got in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he panicked and he couldn't get out of it. So I'm talking to him. He leaves, and I'm with the captain at the time, and I open the card, and I'm like, oh, there's not money in here. Sure enough, there's like 5 crispy $100 bills, and I try to run out to catch him and say, we can't accept money, and he was already gone. And luckily, we had his contact information on the incident report card. I passed it on to the captain. He passed it on to the chief, and we ended up contacting the gentleman and said, this is what we'd like to do. If you want to continue to give that money, we'd like to turn it over to the junior lifeguard so we can have some underprivileged kids be able to attend a junior lifeguard program and learn about ocean safety. And he was okay with that. He was just happy that I saved his life. So it was a good feeling. Thank you.
Well, job well done.
And Jesus Gonzalez is in the back. And stand up, Jesus.
Well, time after time, I try to convey to some of these lifeguard guys about what they tell us sounds so routine. It is routine for them, but what Art said, I pulled him out, I went out there and got him. What you don't understand is when he goes out in that water, those pilings have razor blade muscles on them. If he gets hit against that piling, he could get knocked out, break his back, get injured for life. And what he does and what he did, these guys did, is amazing. And to pull him out, it's more than routine. And so we're glad to have you guys on the beach. So great job. One more time, guys.
One more little note. This Saturday at the Del Mar Fair is a recognition of the fire service. And Imperial Beach Engine 39 is driving a demolition derby car. I don't know if you guys have seen it. The association is, not the fire department, but the association is putting together a derby car, and Aaron Kiley, the engineer here at Engine 39 on B Division, will be driving it. The derby races start around 1 o'clock, and that's when they have their first heats, and then the final collisions occur at 5. So if you're able to get up to Del Mar, it's a great big Burn Institute show because fire engines from all over the county respond into the Del Mar Fair, and it's a great time to bring your kids and have a good time talking with the firefighters and look at the equipment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Art. Thank you, Jesus. We really appreciate your work. Comment slips and items not on the agenda.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Moving on to consent calendar, items 2.1 through 2.4. Entertain a motion to adopt. We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Moving on to item 4.1. Declare a public hearing open. Tyler?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is for a coastal permit, conditional use permit, design review, and site plan review for a 40-foot freestanding faux tree wireless facility at 772 13th Street. The applicant is AT&T. The property is located in the CMU1 commercial, general commercial and mixed use zone. And the project would provide 12 antennas, 24 remote radio units that would all attach to the 40-foot faux tree. They would also propose a new equipment shelter that would be attached to the existing Econolube building, and we'll show pictures of that. They would remove 290 square feet of landscaping for this facility. They would relocate 130 square feet of it, and then replace a parking space with a pervious surface. It could be permeable asphalt or whatever may be pervious. They could not co-locate with the existing faux tree facility off of Florence Street. Due to a lack of equipment area and also because of lack of height on it, they would either have to significantly increase the height of that tree or locate the antennas below where the T-Mobile antennas are today, and that wouldn't give them the service that they're needing to service the city. They also couldn't locate the equipment or facility on the rooftop because of height limitations and also structural limitations, and there wasn't enough room for the equipment. So this is the proposed site that they would locate in the landscaped area just west of the Econo Loop. They wouldn't relocate any parking spaces. They would all remain the same. It would just be portions of the landscaping that would be removed. And this is a site plan of the project. This is the existing Econo Loop building that I'm highlighting here, and the equipment shelter would go just west of it. The tree would be north of the equipment shelter, and they would also construct a new trash and recycling enclosure to service that site. Also shown here is a new landscaped area that they would add onto the site at the northeast corner and then also at the southwest corner. And then the parking space next to the Econo Loop would be pervious surface. This is just a comparison of the existing site as it is today. Again, there's landscaping there today and a trash enclosure, and then a new shelter, a wireless facility, and then a trash and recycling enclosure. These are elevations. It's somewhat hard to see on this plan, but it would be 40 feet tall. And again, there's 12 antennas. And here we could see the new shelter that would be constructed. They would use some lattice work and some landscaping, and they would mimic the design of the building to match the existing Econo Loop today. This is the existing site as we see it today. These trees right here would remain. So they would at least be next to the proposed facility. And this is existing views, and what we're going to do is show 3 different design options that they've proposed. There's a pine tree option, a eucalyptus option, and then a broadleaf tree. Staff is recommending the broadleaf tree because on site there's already an existing broadleaf tree and it seems to match in and blend in with the area, but we could look at each design. So this is existing today. This would be the pine tree and the new equipment shelter. That's a eucalyptus tree, and that's the broadleaf tree. And there's a depiction of each option there: pine tree, eucalyptus, or broadleaf tree. Each would be the same height, and they would provide the same amount of antennas. It's just the aesthetic appeal of it would change. Again, existing site as it is today: pine tree, eucalyptus, and broadleaf tree. And then the site from 13th Street with the 3 options. And these are 3 examples of built-out facilities. This is a pine tree, a eucalyptus, and then broadleaf tree. We also have an existing tree on site, and I'll show that in a second. This is where the existing broadleaf tree is today, and of course proposed. And this is how it looks today. So this is why staff was recommending the broadleaf tree. It would seem to blend in with what's out there today. And it seems to hide the antennas fairly well. This is why the AT&T is proposing the site. The red and blue and yellow areas are lower quality services versus the green. They have the center of the city is covered fairly well. They need to cover the northeast portion and at a later date the west, but there's no proposed sites in the western portion of the city. So staff would recommend to declare the public hearing open, receive the report, close the public hearing, consider those 3 options: the broadleaf, the pine, and the eucalyptus, and then adopt Resolution 2014-7491. That would be for the broadleaf tree. If any other options are chosen, then staff would recommend to revise the language of broadleaf tree to whichever design is chosen. And that concludes staff's report.
I do have 2 speaker slips on this. If you wish to speak, Shelley Kilborn. And I understand, Christine, you're here if we have any questions.
Good evening. My name is Shelley Kilborn. I'm here tonight representing AT&T on the project before you. I don't have anything to add because Tyler did a great report and it was very thorough, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are those the only public speaker slips we have? Do we have any questions from staff or the folks from AT&T?
May I add really quick? Forgot to mention the design review board recommended approval of the broadleaf tree, and also they did just recently AT&T propose a new facility on the western portion that'll come before City Council in the near future with the Pier South Hotel.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bragg?
Thank you. Mr. Foltz, is there already recycling opportunities on this site?
Not at that location. There are at the site, but not for this location. So they'd be adding a new use to it.
Okay. Who receives the revenue from AT&T for this? Does Econolube or the city?
It would be the property owner.
The property owner. Okay. Was there any discussion regarding additional lighting
That was not
AT&T
something.
might provide for us?
Wasn't something that we brought up at a staff level. No.
Okay. Could you maybe highlight what lighting is there right now? In any of your...
I can try and see from aerial. It may be difficult to notice. On the street, I see some. Difficult to see on the site.
Okay, could you point out where it is on the street?
There's one right here.
Okay, there's one there. Okay.
The last slide.
Yeah, the last slide had some.
Yeah, right there.
That right there, you showed the picture right there.
Is that the same one that you had pointed out?
Well, this one's on the cross street. The one I pointed out was on 13th Street.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking you, Mr. Foltz, is because when this, not this, but when we had a similar project brought to us a few years ago, we had brought up the fact that, you know, if we could include lighting in any of these projects like this, because I know that backside is pretty dark. That can be a pretty dark parking lot. So in my mind, you know, it's kind of, we're giving something, maybe they would like to give us something as well. So in the future, if maybe not even with this project, I would certainly welcome the addition of lighting on any of these towers that we can, that we're putting up. And if there's one coming before us in the future, it sounds like in the very near future, maybe that could be a consideration. Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions for staff or the folks? Close the public hearing. And I guess what staff's asking us, if we were looking at a different tree other than the broadleaf, that we need to make that now so they can change the resolution that's before us this evening. I think the broadleaf is fine because there is one on the property already. So then I'd entertain a motion to adopt resolution 2014-7491 approving administrative coastal permit, conditional use permit, design review case, and site plan review, which makes the necessary findings for a 40-foot broadleaf tree wireless facility and provides conditions of approval in compliance with local and state requirements. We have a motion and a second. Any further comments? Could we please vote? My machine.
Motion carried unanimously.
I'm going to take this opportunity to ask Christine Moore up because I know that myself and probably some of yourselves have talked with AT&T about their facility at 13th and Palm Avenue. It has nothing to do with this project, but I think Christine has probably got some good news for us if we could listen to some of it. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Mayor Janney. Christine Moore with AT&T, Director of External Affairs. I've had the pleasure of working with many of you. Been with the company for about 8 years, and the entire time I've had Imperial Beach as part of my territory. So we're proud to be here. We're proud to be your neighbors. We're proud to serve your customers and your residents here at Imperial Beach. We've been longtime supporters of events at Imperial Beach and been a member of the Chamber. We're supporting the Sun and Sand Festival. We have our facility here, and we're also going in your new project on your waterfront. So happy to be here. We have had, over the course of the few years, a lot of conversations, some with more with some of you than others, but some of the questions that have come up regarding our property at 13th and Palm, which we know is the gateway to the city. Questions about paint color. We know that you have a new building next door, your American Legion building, which is a beautiful new building. There has been some great discussions I've had with the city manager recently. I'm sorry. There we go. We had a meeting last week. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We had a meeting with the city manager last week. My apologies. I just gave you promotion. Meeting last week with the city manager to talk about beautification for our property at 13th and Palm. There have been occasionally issues with homeless, and to address that, we went in and did some landscaping improvements. We cut back some of the landscaping where they were storing their belongings previously along the 13th Avenue side. We did a paint rehaul about 6 years ago with the new building that's gone in next door. The city manager and I have been discussing changing that paint color to something that's more contiguous with the building next door and less graffiti friendly. So we'll be having those ongoing discussions in the coming weeks. We have already reached out to a general contractor to get an estimate to do some facade repairs for that property. So we'll be excited to work with the city on that as well. So we continue to look forward to our partnership with events and serving your constituents and making our building something that the city can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. We appreciate it. I know it's a hard struggle. So
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Moving on to items 5.1. Mr. Clark, Chief Clark.
Just stop at the podium. Don't be coming up.
I need to go on record that this fire chief is not looking to be a city manager. Good evening, council and mayor. What I have is for a policy discussion to talk about the street ends that are west of Seacoast related to possible extension of the time in the late evening and also making it a little bit earlier in the morning. I'm the guy that has to sign off on all these tickets as far as uphold or dismiss, and I've had comments on them as well as I've heard from people that, you know, from the surfing community that they would like to see a time start of 5 a.m. in the morning, and from the business community a possible extension out till 12 o'clock at night. And so with that, I'm bringing that information to the council for your discussion and comments back if you want to take further action. Otherwise, we'll just leave it the way it is.
Well, thank you, Chief. I think it is good for discussion. I don't know exactly where my colleagues go. I think that the idea of extending those hours, it still gives us the idea that we're limiting. We don't want overnight down there, but it allows for both businesses and those that are using the beachfront for recreation a little bit better access down there. So I think that, from my perspective, it sounds pretty good. And I think that's a good start in what we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree. I know with restaurants all coming in down there slowly, midnight's a good starting point, but I'm sure at some point that might even be extended a little. But I think this is a great start.
I think it's a good idea. I mean, to benefit both the surfers on the morning end and businesses on the evening end makes a lot of sense. I would wonder why we would need to extend to 12 o'clock in the residential part of the street, though, which seems to be provided for as well.
That was to bring to you as an idea, and then you can adjust it any way you would like. The other area that could be adjusted, should be adjusted, is the park, because Daisy is the street end for the park. The park closes at 10 o'clock, and it would make it easier for the law enforcement community to enforce that area of Daisy if it remained at 10 o'clock. So you have the option of adjusting.
Once again, were you proposing that we go all the way down Seacoast Drive with this change, or were we just talking the commercial district between Palm and Ivy?
That's correct. It was from one end of Seacoast to the other, and then you, as a council, can make a decision on what adjustments you want to make.
Oh, I see.
That's what I'm raising, Mr. Mayor. I don't see why.
So how about if we look at it, since we're talking policy in the open, how about if we look at what you're bringing up is we don't go to midnight south of Ivy Boulevard. Okay. That's presently at 10 o'clock?
Yes.
Almost inadvertently, just as part of the whole package.
So if we could just limit it to, that could be a possibility, limiting it to Imperial Beach Boulevard for the south end.
Yes, sir.
And then the early morning, and then the 10 o'clock staying in the park because you're worried about the public safety end of that part of the park.
Correct.
It doesn't hurt us that much for the businesses at the night because there's still several other street ends plus Seacoast Drive. But then what about what time in the morning were we starting here, Chief?
It could be as early as 5 o'clock because right now gray light, people are coming into the area about 5 o'clock. They're getting their wetsuits on.
So we're looking at 5? Do we want to do that all the way south too? Okay, I think we're okay with the 5 o'clock all the way south as well.
Okay.
10 o'clock at the park and midnight between Palm and Imperial Beach
I've got
Boulevard. Ms. Bragg, did you have more comments on that then?
I do. In the staff report, it says attachment 4 is a chart of the current. Is that attachment 3 actually? Because if it isn't, I don't have attachment 4. However, I'm a
Should be attachment 3.
colleague. Colleagues, thank you. I would not be in favor of a midnight curfew on Date Avenue either. If we're going to have Daisy be 10 o'clock, I would believe, on the other side of the hotel, keeping that at 10 o'clock as well.
Well, comments from as far as public safety goes, and I've sort of put my business hat on as far as restaurant. There's a lot of activity that involves the hotel and the lobby area and using the restaurant and the bar that they would park in that area. We have had tickets that have been upheld that have been, after 10 o'clock at night parked in that area.
How many tickets?
And the access to the hotel's parking lot is up a day
That's
too,
correct
right?
also. I've had at least 5 tickets that have been in that area.
Since it's opened?
Yes.
Okay.
That's been a mixed message. Like, yeah. This one's open, this one's closed, this one's open, this one, I think it'd be close to.
But isn't Daisy going to be closed at 10?
But that's the park.
It's actually the park. It's not street.
I know, but it's I'm just thinking on either side of the hotel for consistency's sake. So one's going to be 10, one's going to be 12.
There's one exception, and actually 2. The exceptions will be anything south of IB Boulevard. That will be at 10 o'clock, and the park will be at 10 o'clock. Everything else will be till midnight.
Which is Date and Elm and Elkwood,
Yes,
Ebony.
that's correct.
So then 4 blocks would be midnight, those 4 blocks.
And actually, if you want to look at coming further to the north and get more into the business community, that's more residential when you look at those first couple streets going north from IB Boulevard. Those could also remain at 10 o'clock. But I don't know if you want to go back and forth.
I think we had a recommendation. I thought we were moving on doing between Imperial Beach Boulevard and Palm. I think this confusion is if we start changing one street end to another, I can't support that. I can support going from Palm to IB with one thing. The park is not a street end. We're talking street ends here. If we start doing that, then I mean, you got to consider the normal citizen. Today I park on one street, tomorrow I park on another. There's a different set of rules. I don't think that's fair. I can support doing inclusive with the park being not a street end.
That's
and
fine.
I think that's my personal opinion. I don't know what it is. I mean, what the chief's asking for is our input, and then coming back to us for obviously a resolution, which we could have further discussion on. As far as that, I think that we're different blocks of a street having different times. I think if we're getting really
Agree. It makes it
Making
more
it tough.
consistent for the law enforcement people that are writing the tickets and also the people who are parking.
I'm worried about the people parking.
I understand.
Lieutenant Ryan's folks will figure it out.
Yes.
So then from Palm Avenue to Daisy is going to be midnight?
Yes. Not to Daisy, up to Date. Daisy is going to remain at 10
Daisy
o'clock.
is not
That's
street
the
end.
park. It's the park.
Street ends.
So Dahlia would be 12 o'clock.
Yes.
We're looking at Elder. We're looking at Elkwood. Date. No.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Dahlia.
Dahlia.
Yeah.
We're looking at 5 streets.
Ebony.
Where's Palm Ave? Can I ask what Palm Avenue is?
Palm is at 10 o'clock right now.
So are we including?
No, excuse me. Palm is 24 hours, 72-hour parking.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
that was why we didn't include it.
Exactly
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
Chief Clark, did you envision like a trial period on this, or was there, just forever? How, if it didn't work out, if we had complaints from residents, how would we treat that?
Well, I think you would treat it like you do right now, is that if you had a number of complaints generated from people, they would be coming back here. But once we take this action, we're going to go out and repost the signs and change the street end posting so that people understand it's from 5 a.m. until 10 in those areas that we've talked about, and from 5 a.m. to midnight in the other areas. And primarily those midnight areas are your business community right now.
There's no vote here. I think that the chief's just looking for input, and he'll come back to us again.
Yeah, I've got direction from you guys, and I will have a report back and be able to take action on it.
I have one more question. Did you have any input from anybody in the residential area? Had you gone out and done a little bit of field work maybe and talked to any of the business or the residential folks that would be involved in this? Have they weighed in at all?
Almost 3 years ago now, it'll be in November, 3 years, that we did have a workshop, and it was a workshop that was held on a Wednesday night and also on a Saturday morning, and we had comments from the community. And I think where Mr. Spriggs was talking about that they had a concern that if it went later than 10, and he's addressed that. The rest of it, the business community has, hoped to have this happen for them.
I just know talking to some people that live on Seacoast Drive, right on Seacoast Drive, that they've often encountered a lot of illegal activity and undesirable activity around their home. So, if parking is allowed later, will that escalate?
Well, parking on Seacoast is unlimited. So the street ends are where the sheriffs do their patrols and enforce if they see somebody parked there. They also talk to people if they're out making noise and creating a problem.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
The sheriffs are very good at their job too. I've got a couple tickets when we were having our streetlight debates. Coming back 5 minutes late to my car and already having a ticket on there. So they're out there pretty quick.
As I said, Lieutenant Ryan's folks will have no problem figuring it out.
Right. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5.2, Mr. Hall.
Mayor and Council, the next item is a request to fund a sewer project, but I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you a little bit about our sewer fund, because over the last few months, as we have prepared fund balance policies and prepared our CIP for the City Council to consider, we've talked a lot about the general fund, and we didn't spend very much time on the sewer fund. And in the last couple of meetings, there's been a lot of items that have been associated with the sewer fund. And so I thought it might be appropriate to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the sewer fund and then talk about the specific project. But it's important to realize that the sewer enterprise fund is separate and distinct from the general fund. It is not part of the general fund, and it does stand alone, and it is operated similar to a private business, a private for-profit business, if you will. And in fact, in most of our financial documents, it's referred to as a business-type activity. And it is intended to operate on its own with its own revenues and expenditures, and is not intended to be supported from the general fund. But like the general fund, the enterprise fund has been set up with both reserves as well as operating budgets. And so in some ways, it does operate like the general fund. But the City Council in years past have identified a policy to retain no less than $2 million as an emergency reserve fund in the sewer fund. And we have been able to maintain that $2 million emergency fund and still have it today. In addition to the emergency fund, the sewer enterprise fund has a capital improvement reserve of $1.7 million. And where that has come from is essentially within the operating budget of the sewer fund. The City Council budgets approximately $400,000 per year to do capital projects in the sewer fund. And as you can see, that has built up a little bit in that some of the projects right now are under construction, some are still in the planning stage. But it is anticipated that with all the improvements we need to make to the sewer sewer system right now, we will consume that $1.7 million of the capital money, but that we will retain the $2 million emergency fund that was established by the City Council. And I apologize if I had a cold, so I'm a little hoarse. The operating budget, much like the general fund, identifies the annual expenditures and revenues of the sewer enterprise fund. And as we discussed in the last meeting, a study was conducted to analyze where we are on the operating costs, not so much on the capital costs or the emergency reserve, but where we are with the revenues and expenditures on an annual basis in the sewer department. The initial study included the revenues and the expenditures associated with providing sewer treatment for the Navy. And as you know, it was discovered that the Navy transports its effluent directly to the Point Loma facility. And so the study needs to be updated to remove both those revenues and expenditures from the sewer enterprise fund operating budget. When we did that, we discovered, which we have done at a staff level, we've discovered that there's an approximate $225,000 annual shortfall in the operating budget of the sewer fund, which is about 5%. And that's what the study reflected. And so the first step in increasing the sewer rates occurred at your last meeting when the council adopted a 1.6% increase in the sewer funds. The decision was made approximately, I believe it was about a year and a half ago. The decision was made to implement that increase rather than a large increase at one time, to implement that increase over a series of 5 years. And so one of the things that you might be seeing, and part of the reason we have at least a temporary shortfall in the sewer fund, is that a gradual increase may not compensate fully for inflation, and it certainly doesn't compensate for those years where we have a 5% deficit in our operating budget, and we only raise it by 1.6%. You're missing, at least in the initial years, you're missing that initial increase in the revenues. Excuse me. And so what we'll continue to do over the next few years, first we will back out that Navy portion of revenues and expenditures, and then we'll continue to watch the sewer enterprise fund to make sure that the study is consistent and that the revenues and the expenditures in the sewer department normalize, and that we have a stable fund for the sewer department. To get into some of the project details, because it was a little bit confusing, and again, the way we run the sewer enterprise fund, that doesn't operate necessarily. We report on a fiscal year, but again, it's an ongoing business. It's a business type activity. But as I had mentioned, for the past several years, $400,000 has been included for capital improvements. We went out and confirmed that the cast iron sewer main that goes beneath SR 75 between Rainbow and Bernardo Shores is in deteriorated condition. In fact, it's in very poor condition and could fail relatively soon if we don't do something about that. The item to replace that line by boring underneath the highway was included in the major maintenance schedule approved on October 16th, 2013, and it was part of, as you can see, annual mainline repairs, as well as the and about $400,000 was targeted for an overall project. The project then was split into two pieces: the annual mainline and manhole repairs, as well as the micro tunneling that is the subject of this report. And when the project was split into two projects, the appropriated budget for that year was split with $210,000 going to mainline and manhole repairs, and the remaining $189,640 going to the micro tunneling. We now have bid that project, and the lowest responsive and qualified bidder for the project was submitted by Blue Pacific Engineering Construction, but it was significantly higher than the appropriated amount, which was $189,000, but it was much lower than the next lowest bidder of $717,000. Now, where some of the confusion came in is that there was an engineer's estimate for the project of $374,000. And the reason that the current appropriation is $189,000 and the engineer's estimate is $374,000 is that there was an anticipation that we would use part of the $400,000 appropriation in the 15-year budget to do this project. But after looking at the project, it's more, we need to do it sooner than that. And so the initial engineer's estimate was $374,333, but it was a very complex project. Not to mention, there's essentially a sole source provider for the micro tunneling that's going to occur. And again, both the bids we received on the project, when we only received two bids, the first thing I did was ask Hank, gee, maybe we should rebid this project, see if we can get some more competitive bids. But what we found out is that both the bidders actually used the same company for the microtunneling. It's almost a sole source. There's not a lot of companies that provide that service. And so rebidding the project wouldn't likely result in a lower cost for doing the work. And the work needs to be done rather quickly. And so staff is recommending that we award the project to Blue Pacific Engineering and Construction to complete the work. And here's a breakdown of the project funding. There's a current appropriation in the Sewer Enterprise Fund of $189,000. We're seeking an additional appropriation from the Sewer Enterprise Capital Reserve of $430,000 for a total project cost of $619,000, and you can see the project cost there. The project management of $29,000, construction contract of $590,000 for again a total of $620,000. The Sewer Enterprise Fund has approximately $1.7 million to complete these types of projects, and that's in addition to the $2 million that is the set aside for emergency reserve. Hank is here and can answer any of the technical questions about the project, and I believe there are actually a couple maps showing where that project and some of the construction details for the project.
If I might just show those two slides and describe briefly what the project is, because it's a pretty significant project construction-wise. It's also unique for us. I've never done a microtunneling project, and we probably have no other opportunity to do this any time in the near future. We looked at trenching across Highway 75 only briefly because I don't know how we'd ever get Caltrans to buy into something of that nature. There were a number of other options that the engineer looked at. It was after extensive look at different ideas and different contractors and discussing with them. This was the one that we are recommending and the one we bid, and that is called microtunneling. Basically what we're doing, this is Rainbow, this is Highway 75 you see running through, no you don't. Maybe I better not touch it. Diagonally across the screen is Highway 75 on the south side. On the bottom is center is Rainbow, and just across the street is Bernardo Shores. In the lighter line with the S through it is the existing sewer line that runs underneath Highway 75. The darker line just to the right of the line that has S in it is the proposed new line. And if you look to the kind of the south or to the near down the line, you'll see a box or rectangle at the bottom of that line. This is a pit that will be dug into Rainbow Drive on near the curb edge. That's 22 feet deep. And that will be considered the receiving end of the microtunnel that will go under Highway 75. If you follow that line across to the Bernardo Shores side of the Highway 75, there's another rectangle, and that box is a little bit bigger in terms of length and width, and the depth is a little bit less. It's about 17 feet. So you can see it's a pretty significant project going underneath Highway 75. Also at that location, there will be a trench for most of the length anyway, that runs diagonally across the driveway entrance to Bernardo Shores that will terminate at a manhole near where the old motel property was, because that property is also fed through this line. So we're replacing all of that infrastructure, and it's it's a cast iron line that's in there now. It's been there God knows how long, and it is deteriorating pretty badly. And I'm very concerned that if we don't get it fixed promptly, we run the risk of that thing collapsing, and then it will be very difficult to get waste from Bernardo Shores across Highway 75. So I know the cost is a lot more than we had anticipated, and the engineer testified, but I don't think we're going to get a better price by rebidding and trying another technique. And I believe we should move forward with getting this repaired so we don't run into an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Spriggs, do you have a question on this?
And Mr. Levine, it's not that I like picking on you or anything. He's smiling. Good. Yeah, the cost estimate was a bit short, and the bids came in. The lowest bid was 60% higher than the estimate. And I appreciate your putting the schematics up and describing the project. It gives everybody a better sense of, the complexity, where it is, and also how important it is that it goes right, because that is a major highway. And the fact that the same subcontractor would be on both bids, I follow you there. That means that the actual work's going to be done by a subcontractor. It'd be the same subcontractor. It's kind of interesting that there's such a difference in the bid price in that case. Looking at it that way, but I'm wondering whether we should be questioning whether we've got the right city engineer. Given the huge variation here that took place, and it's not that I want to, jump on anyone, but it just seems to me that we've got to run a multi-million-dollar capital budget in Imperial Beach, and we've got to have the ability to forecast what our costs are going to be with capital improvements programs of various sorts, especially these kinds of projects. And I know that there are always conditions that the contractors are aware of that maybe the consulting engineers are not. Conditions both in the ground and in the market. But I've seen so many of these at the university where we have where everybody's very upset when it's about a 20% or 25% bid over budget. But when you get up higher than that, you start wondering about your estimators and whether you need to get two estimates, whether you need to get somebody else. And so I'm just raising that, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but this is a pretty big variation here, and it's a lot of money and a lot of consequence, because now we've got to dip way into the reserve in order to fund this project. That, to me, this is very significant.
Yeah, on this one, it seems like time is the essence of this one, and if it does fail, it's catastrophic, I would imagine. Collapsing Highway 75. And I know you don't have a crystal ball because you told me you don't. How long?
I'm sorry, how long before it collapses?
Yeah.
And AJ's been telling me that it could go at any time. I don't know that it's quite that dire, but he's been pushing on me for a while. AJ's the sewer supervisor.
Okay.
By looking at the video of it, and it's a long ways down. So I'm guessing that it's the soil around is packed pretty hard. So it would maybe take an earthquake or something to hopefully break it the rest of the way through. I just don't know. I don't even know if all of the cast iron is intact as it is now. They were unable to get the CCTV all the way through. They were not able to get it all the way through.
Yeah. So I understand. We all have these projects we do, be it at home, be it and the overrun is like on this one. It's one of those things that we seem like we have to bite the bullet and get it done. Now, my question is, now is it going to be upgraded in size for potential use of whatever may come to Bernardo Shores?
It is. It's an 8-inch line that's going to go in there. There's a large outer casing. That's why they're calling it tunneling and not boring. There's a large outer casing that'll be put in, and then there'll be an inner sewer pipe in the side of that. And then it's 8-inch, and the casing I think is 10.
Okay, and now it goes right to Bernardo Shores. I see it right to the gate. Does it go into?
No, the rest of it beyond that is their property, so it's their lateral coming in.
So they're not going to contribute. They have no contribution at all into this.
No, sir.
No, it's not required or
no.
Like that. Okay.
Now, it'll be interesting, and they may be interested, or the new developer, to see what it looks like once they get it open, so they can see. We bring their line back into the manhole there to see what their condition is. They may be interested in that.
Well, chances are, it's in bad shape. I would imagine. Yeah, they have to replace that. Okay, thank you. Ms. Bragg.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions, Mr. Levine. When was the CCTV done? Do you remember how long ago it's been?
I think this was the one that we did. This was the one we did. Let's see. The original one we did was in 2008, and then we came back probably 2 years later. It's probably 10 or 11.
Okay, so that was this report is based on a few years ago. So
exactly.
We can only safely assume that it's much worse.
It hasn't gotten any better.
It hasn't gotten any better. My questions have to do with the logistics of the project. What considerations will be made for traffic, and how long is the project going to last, and will there be an interruption in service, and what's our contingency plan if there's a collapse? I mean, this is a huge project, and you yourself said it's not one we've done before, so I'm sure there's a little bit of trepidation going on in your heart as well as mine, and having to do with, does Caltrans have to? I mean, there's a lot going on here with this project, so I've got a lot of concerns about it. Can you speak to any of them?
Sure. This project, because we are crossing under Highway 75, even though it's underground and not above, it still requires a Caltrans encroachment permit. That took, I don't know, three months or so, going back and forth between the engineer and them about the conditions that we imposed on the contractor for boring underneath. And those conditions have been incorporated as part of the contract. The line is that the new line they're putting in is completely separate and away from the existing line, so they do not anticipate that it should bother the existing line as a microtunnel underneath it. They're putting in brand new manholes on either end, either side of Highway 75, and those will go in and tap into the existing line as it goes into Rainbow Drive and goes into Bernardo Shores before any interruption of service will take place. So it's designed such that there is no interruption of service, and they should not have any impact on the existing line by the work that they're doing. I mean, there's always a potential for something going wrong, but I'm pretty confident. We've looked at it. Our engineers had Caltrans look at it in great detail. So I mean, there's always a potential. The traffic on Highway 75 should not be interfered with. The traffic coming off of Rainbow Drive, coming off of Highway 75 onto Rainbow Drive, there is room to be able to, we think there's room enough for people to do that. There will have to be traffic cones and traffic we'll have to reroute the traffic a little bit around where the pit is, because you can see, I'm afraid there's not any pointer on this thing. Yeah, there is. You can see the curb line coming around here, and the hole is here. Here are the lanes. Here's a left turn lane coming up. So my guessing is, we haven't seen a traffic control plan from the contractor yet, because we haven't awarded the contract and we haven't met him. But my hope is that they'll still be able to make a right-hand turn coming off of Highway 75 for at least part of the time. If not, they'll have to go to 7th, but I don't see, I mean, that's not a lot out of the way. We'll increase the traffic a little bit on 7th coming back on Palm, probably. Should not affect traffic coming up Rainbow, turning right or left onto Highway 75. But we'll have to see what their traffic control plan is, and obviously it has to be approved by me before they can do it as well. And Caltrans has put specifications in there what they allow us to do.
When is the project going to start?
We don't know that for sure, but typically it takes a couple months after you award the contract. We'll in a couple weeks we'll put a notice. We'll put a pre-construction meeting notice out and have all of the players present here probably in the city hall somewhere, and then they have to submit all of their submittals for the different pipe sizes and all of the materials they're going to use in the project. They have to have their business license. They have to have traffic control plan. It has to be approved. Their stormwater plan or pollution prevention plan. What they're going to do with the water that they encounter when they go down that deep, because they will be below the water line. All of those things will have to be reviewed and approved. So that usually takes 6 to 8 weeks before you have a construction ready to start. And it'll be dependent part on their schedule as well. So in summary, you're probably looking at August at the best to be able to start on that project.
How long do you anticipate the project lasting?
They were given 120 days, but we believe the engineer believes, based on the discussions that he's had with the microtunnel company, that microtunneling itself should only take about a week. Getting the pit down there and getting it secure to be able to bore across on both sides, and then build a manhole up that's got to come down, it's got to be built up from 22 feet below up to the surface, is going to be another probably 2 or 3 weeks just to build it back up, and it's probably 2 or 3 weeks to get it down there and get it stabilized with the water. But we believe that 120 days is generous.
Okay. Where will they store all their equipment?
I mean, we've got some options in the past, and you may have seen it. The lot there on where the old credit union was has been used before. If that is not under construction and they need it, generally the city has offered that to them to store equipment. I mean, they don't have a lot of materials they're going to have to bring in and store anyplace. I mean, they don't have miles of pipe to bring in and store. It's basically, I think, just equipment that they're going to be doing the digging the holes, the pits, and then the machines are going to be down inside that area. So there may be some of it stored right there at the curb line of Rainbow Drive on the west side.
Okay, thank you. I raised those questions just because, that's a large, really, when you think about it, residential area. It's a very heavily traveled area. I'm just worried about the impacts to the community.
Yeah.
That, and how long it will take and that kind of thing. So thank you, Mr. Levine,
I
for
appreciate
your answers.
that is a very big concern.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Levine, I guess what we're asking for here is adoption of the resolution awarding the contract.
And appropriating the additional dollars out of the sewer enterprise fund.
Entertain a motion to adopt resolution 2014-7494 and appropriate money for this project. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Would we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
And before we go on to the next one, because of some of the things that Ms. Bragg brought up, Mr. Levine, I think that your pre-construction meetings might be that we might want to have a meeting where we inform the public of what's going to go on there and how the traffic patterns will change. Until you know what their traffic plan is, it'd be hard to. But the northbound, the left turn off of Rainbow is very important. I see that quite a bit in the mornings. The southbound off of Rainbow is not near as used. But that right turn coming from Highway 75 is very heavily used too. And I know that Ms. Bragg and working with the MTS have been talking about that bus maybe not being there, but we want to inform them because I don't think they're going to be able to make that turn.
Yeah, we'll have to. MTS will be part of the notification.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5.3, Mr. Hall.
Mayor and Council, recently I was going through some of the council policies and I was able to identify a council policy that we wanted to discuss a little bit. And that is that your current policy says that city council members shall not attend city-sponsored workshops. For instance, some of the ones we've been having recently were the Palm Avenue Master Plan public meetings. There were some meetings on Elm Street and some of those others. And the current policy is that the council members shouldn't attend those. However, it's certainly been the policy of this council to increase to the extent possible some of the public outreach and be somewhat more involved in what's happening in the community. In preparing this, and after I had placed this on the agenda, there had been questions from some of the council members about just exactly how this relates with the Ralph M. Brown Act, which is the open meetings laws in the state of California. And so I asked Jennifer to at least prepare some information about what it means for council members to attend public meetings, and then we could have a discussion about whether or not it's appropriate to amend your current policy so that council members at least have the option of attending some of the city-sponsored workshops. So, Mayor, if you don't mind, turn some time over to Jennifer, and she can at least give you some background on this.
Please.
Mayor and Council, so the Brown Act defines a meeting, and a meeting means you're going to have to put an agenda out and notice it in the required time, 24 hours special meeting, 72 hours regular meeting. But it defines a meeting as any congregation of a majority of the members of a legislative body at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. So if you have a meeting that meets this definition, you have to notice it under the Brown Act, as I mentioned. And there is an exception to this meeting definition that says that council members can attend meetings and workshops of other agencies. That's not considered a meeting. But that exception doesn't say council members can attend city-sponsored workshops. So the situation that you have here is that if the policy that is in place that says council members shall not attend, that obviously keeps you from having a violation of the Brown Act, because 3 council members aren't going to show up if your policy says no one can attend. The proposed change to the policy would also be in compliance with the Brown Act, because essentially it would be if there is interest to go, then council would discuss it and pick only 2 members of the council to go. Because once 3 members show up at a city-sponsored meeting, you're going to have a potential violation of the Brown Act. So the policy would allow the council to pick 2 that could attend, and then we wouldn't have the problem where there's a majority there, because again, the definition means just hearing a discussion of something that is the subject matter of your jurisdiction. Also, if a majority of the council does want to show up on this potential change, if the council wants to go in that direction, then it would be noticed as a council meeting. So the whole thing is the Brown Act doesn't want you to have a city-sponsored meeting where a majority of the council members show up unless you're going to notice it as a meeting. Or you take the road of what the policy originally was, or as the potential amendment here, to say to ensure that you're not going to have 3 council members at a city-sponsored meeting unless it's noticed. Which when you notice the meeting, obviously, then it turns it into a more formal meeting than what I think typically city-sponsored workshops or community input gathering, those kind of meetings are going to be. So, and I can answer any other questions depending on, the potential changes or anything else. But the changes, either leaving it the way it is, that keeps you in compliance with the Brown Act, which, like I said, the Brown Act really doesn't want you to have meetings unless you're going to notice them. Or putting in these changes will make sure that the city council is in control and making sure 3 people don't show up, or you're going to turn it into a council meeting.
Mr. Hall, would you?
Yeah, the only other thing I would report to the mayor and council is that in some briefings with some members of the city council, there was also some concern that about exactly what it means when city council members do attend these workshops. Should they be allowed to provide input, or should they be there simply to observe and understand public sentiment? And I did not address that. I kind of took a stab in the dark here, as you can imagine. But that might be another topic for discussion that was not brought up by the staff report that I would just bring to your attention that some council members had a question about.
Great segue. That was one of them. So there's a couple different things here. One is 2 or fewer, 2 or 1, and the other is if we hit the 3 mark, and then the Brown Act is triggered. But overall of this is the concept that this is getting at. There's another concept here, and that's the existing policy, which we apparently violated, actually prohibits council members. I mean, it's not an ordinance, it's not a law, it's a policy, so nobody's going to jail, I hope, because I like going to community meetings, and there have been quite a few that we've had where a number of us have attended. Where city staff has essentially provided information that would be technical violations of the policy. I think it's very important, especially in this sort of thing that we've been all talking about and pushing towards, which is open government, that we have opportunities, at least as observers, to hear how the community is responding to particular proposals and that are presented to them in informal settings. I think that's very important, and maybe members of this council who were around early, like the mayor and Councilmember Bragg, possibly have a different perspective. I'd really be interested in hearing that perspective. I understand that it's possible that 1 or 2 council members in a community meeting might have the effect of stifling community opinions. That would be bad. That wouldn't be good at all. I mean, the whole purpose of the community meeting is to get community opinions to the city. I just wonder whether we could, getting to the point that City Manager Hall just mentioned of the difference between being an observer and a participant, and the difference between being a kind of in the background observer, not being prominently, engaging with people and that sort of thing, whether there's any way we can reduce the possibility of council members having a sort of putting a chill on the public's discussion. I can see a situation where if someone who's really prominently, well, most council members hopefully are known to the community, but if the mayor is sitting in the front row of a community meeting, maybe people will feel it's kind of official and formal, and someone might be shy to ask a question or state something. Even a mere council member like me sitting in the back might do that, but I would think there'd be a big difference if, what I like to do is come in and sit in the back row and just hear how people are feeling about stuff. And I think probably most of us are kind of like that who go to these things, rather than, ask questions and get all involved in the discussion and all of that. I mean, that's not really consistent with letting the community members have their say and make their input. So I would opt for, us to be more liberal with allowing council members, less than 3, to attend on a fairly liberal basis, as long as we have an understanding that it's not about us, it's about the community, and we're there kind of as observers. Now, in the Brown Act thing, if the Brown Act just requires a public notice, and it may have more requirements that make it more formal. This is in the case that 3 or more want to attend. Let's just assume as observers and kind of quietly just be there. And we've had some hot issues in the community where that's happened, like the sports park issue. I remember there was, and the Sun and Sea Sandcastle original meetings where the court was here. There were 4 or 5 people at those meetings, and because of the amount of community interest. So technically, a violation. But can we? I probably shouldn't be saying this on the record, but is there a way that if those are noticed as public meetings at which council members will be present, but it's not a council meeting, it's a community meeting, is there a way to notice it in such a way that council is there, or three members or more are there, but are not taking action, are in a passive capacity in that sense? I mean, can we comply with Brown Act if we have such a matter of such importance to the community? Can we comply and still, not interfere with what the community needs to be able to say and do at these meetings?
Well, it would be noticed as a city council meeting, but it would be probably a special meeting, and it would say it was a workshop, and you could have staff facilitate as opposed to the mayor running the meeting. But you're likely going to have some form of minutes, because it's a it has to be a city council meeting, because that's your legislative body if you're going to notice the meeting as a meeting. But yes, there can be some informalities, like being that you have staff conducted or a consultant, if that's the issue, conducting the meeting and taking input. But
that's a very expansive approach to the Brown Act, it seems to me. I mean, that's like we're having a workshop, but if we're not having a workshop, if we're not talking at the meeting, if we're not discussing amongst ourselves.
Let's look at it, because you mentioned something, and I have been here a little bit longer, and I remember when the original policy came up, and it had to do with perhaps more than 2 people being in a meeting. But I think also the issue where you brought up is we don't want to have a public meeting workshop type where we're asking for the public's opinion or input on stuff where they feel like they're influenced on what they're saying because council is there. So I think the idea, like what you say, sit in the back row, I think that's totally appropriate to have a council member or two in the back row just listening if they don't participate. It's not written down in the way Mr. Hall put this policy together. I think the issue of if there's going to be a third, at least with this council as it sits today, if we had something that was a hot topic, I don't think that we would have a fight amongst us to say the first two down here wanted to go, okay, we'll let that happen. The third person's just not going to go because we'll have to trust, because under Mr. Hall's policy, you would be coming back to report to us after that meeting that you attended. Because I think that we're ladies and gentlemen enough to understand we're not there to influence the public's opinion. We're trying to hear it. Right. And I would be satisfied, and let's say if it was a meeting that yourself or Mr. Bilbray went to, and that report back at the next council meeting would be sufficient if I wasn't able to go or something. I think the policy would allow us then, knowing that we're having a community workshop on Palm Avenue Master Plan, we have a meeting like tonight, we know it's next week, and yourself and Ms. Bragg expressed your desires to go to it. You've now notified that. Mr. Patton wouldn't just walk in because he was free that evening without something. And then if it's really something that we want third, we're going to have to just hold a regular meeting. If it's that desirable that more than 2 members want to go, there is no way around this but to hold an official meeting. And that means minutes, which means we've got to put in city clerks, we've got to do that. But I don't see this particular council, and this is a policy that can be modified by future councils at any time, having a problem with respecting the desires of others to go to it. I think what Mr. Hall's put down here is the basic guidelines to keep us out of the Brown Act violations, but then still allow members of this council to sit there and listen. The only thing I would ask off the top of Mr. Hall's thing is specifically put it in there that the council is willing to not participate in the discussion at that public workshop. And I think that would, like you say, it's not law. It would just basically hold your feet to the fire that that's what we're expecting of ourselves. So, I mean, I see what Mr. Hall put together. I think we do want to be able to do it. We do have a lot of public meetings. I mean, whether it be for Palm Avenue, whether it be for Elm Street, we do a lot of different things out there that we want to hear inputs on. Some of them we can't necessarily attend, all of us. Might be one person can, might be 2. And if you inform us or we inform ourselves that we're going to be there, that 3rd, 4th, and 5th member are aware that, 2 out. If we have to take a vote, say that everybody wants to go, so what 2 get to go? That's the way it is. I think constraining it to make it an official meeting does the same thing as putting yourself or myself in the front row. It constrains the real input we're looking for if it becomes that formal a meeting. So I think that's what I'm thinking there. Because you did mention that, and it's not. I mean, Mr. Hall and I talked about it. I mean, they have cities that designate that. I know my neighbors to the north here, Coronado. This year the 2 members of the council that go to the K's when they have their homeowners meetings are X and Y. And we don't want to designate that you're the one interested only in Palm Avenue Master Plan because it might be something else. So, I mean, that's my thoughts on how this policy came about. It was, how long ago was it? 8 years ago or so. And it had to do with trying to keep us out of trouble and make it equitable for everybody. So, I mean, I think there's a way to make this work if we put in a little bit of language in there to remind ourselves to be listeners. And whatever it might be. So, Mr. Bilber, you had some comments on this?
I just have might think of adding something. Even though I don't see us up here having a problem, it doesn't mean that a future council wouldn't have a problem with a rotation of different council members going to certain meetings. You get a certain mayor in there that just wants 2 of his cronies to go every time. Might get a little bit problematic. So I'd like to see something. That is true, but you understand, just something to kind of keep a rotation going.
My experience, I went to the Bernardo Shores one, the Port one, Highway 75 one recently, And I pop my head in the door. I look around. I'll ask one of the city officials. How many council members are here? It's kind of awkward. I'd hate to walk in there and there's two others, and I walk in there and there's. So I think it's a good idea that this is happening, and observation only is a key.
Count it, just stick your head.
Yeah. Well, so I think observation only. I love listening to comments that people are making, but like you guys both conveyed, I think us getting up to a microphone and speaking is an absolute no-no. But I think having a conversation with somebody that may be asking you a question could be okay. I think there's some gray area there. Correct.
So, I mean, I guess, oh, sorry, Ms. Bragg.
Thank you. I'm in total agreement with the observation only. However, I'm looking for something that's a little bit more liberating, actually. It's been our, all of us have experienced attending a meeting, and maybe, Mayor, maybe you weren't there, and then I have to defend you. What, doesn't the mayor care about this? Doesn't Patton care about this? And I don't like being in that position. And then also, who gets what to get to go? It's whoever pushes their button the fastest, whoever the mayor looks at first. So I'm looking for something that's a little bit more liberating. We all, when we went through initially the whole sports park fiasco, and several of us were there, and looking at each other and just thinking, oh my gosh, of course we didn't say anything to each other, but there's always that experience that after the meeting, maybe there's some people at the meeting who are not getting up to the microphone, but if as a council member you're there, they certainly want to talk to you afterwards. So I think it should be kind of policy too that, stated, you know what, I was just here to listen. And that's why we all go, is to listen. Personally, I do not like hearing it secondhand that the audience was really upset or the audience was really for this. I want to experience that firsthand. So I have no problem with making it a formal meeting, noticing it. I think that it could garner greater community support that way. So that would be my advocacy, is that as many of us can go that would like to.
And it takes us back that very last point. So below 3, I think we're all on the same page. We're all saying the same thing. Just be observers. And above 2, 3 or more, same thing, I suppose. And that's where we get into this kind of funny situation where we want to be there as observers, but we're a majority. But we've got a council majority, and so all of a sudden, everything tips over that this has to be now a council meeting, gavel and all, city clerk and all, minutes. Pledge of Allegiance. I don't know. I mean, how many of these elements are, and I'm asking our city attorney, how many of these elements can we not formalize and not do and still have compliance with the intent of the Brown Act, that the public is notified that there's a meeting and that city council members are there, but in fact the city council is not participating and not taking action. I mean, the whole idea of the Brown Act is to notify the public that their elected representatives are going to be doing something, In this case, it's just listening, the least active of those 3 verbs you mentioned. So it's just listening, but we're not really taking any action.
Right.
Is there any way we can downgrade the formality?
I think staff, if you get to the point where you think you need to notice as a public meeting, staff will investigate as many things as possible. The Brown Act doesn't go down to the level of detail of the mayor must do the gavel and there must be a flag salute and there must be the city clerk in attendance. So we will try, if it gets to that point, and the city has, and the city clerk just notified me, the sports park workshop was noticed as a meeting. So that was, noticed as a meeting. Exactly. Thank you. So, and the city is very diligent to make sure that if it is something that's important, then the meeting was posted. So I think there's not going to be black and white that says all of these exact things. So on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the subject matter, if council decides that it's important enough for all 5 council members to be there, staff will just work with the council and the subject matter to try to take away as many of the formalities as possible.
So let me go back to what Ms. Bragg was bringing up as far as rotation, or what Mr. Bilbray mentioned, favorites or something like that. Should we ask Mr. Hall to come up with an innovative policy that says that the first quarter of the year it's these 2 with an alternate, and then it rotates around or something like that, but we have alternates? Somehow we've got to come
What
up
I
with
was
a
kind of
system.
thinking of is kind of how we select our mayor pro tem, where somebody who hasn't done it, if 3 people want to go and one of the council members did not go last time, and 2 of the council members did, then the person who didn't go should be able to go this time. It's kind of my thoughts on it.
I'm
just
thinking
want
we're
the
going to ask Mr. Hall to bring this back.
Yeah.
So, we're giving him ideas of what he can come up with for the alternatives for paragraph, whatever it is. So, what other thoughts do you have?
Well, I want myself and my colleagues, future colleagues, to have the opportunity to go whenever they want, as often as they want. Right. To be stymied, and let's say I was appointed to go, then my job, I work in a restaurant, hotel. I'm never sure when I'm going to have to be called in. So I was appointed. Now I can't go. Do we have to have a meeting now to appoint somebody else? Is there a third person who's on standby?
If it's the meeting, a council meeting prior to one of these public things, the interest comes and you say, I do have that Wednesday or Tuesday or Thursday evening available, and the minute we hit 3, they're going to have to go into the second mode where they announce it and put it as a public meeting. That's
the problem we're having right now is trying to get this formalized. If there's a public meeting that's that far in advance where we can get a discussion of who's going to go on the agenda and then have the meeting and decide, that's great. But there may be many, there's probably as many or more things that come up more spontaneously, and maybe that staff, for example.
I'm going to jump in on that one right now, because I don't believe staff should ever have a public meeting that we are not aware of first. All right? In other words, we are still the policy makers of this city.
All I'm saying is, how do we have a discussion about it if it's not on the agenda?
Well, then we'd have to have that.
Well, that's why it's got to be put on the agenda, this policy says. So staff is going to have to, staff typically knows a month in advance because they notice the public to come to these things.
You should clarify, this is only city-sponsored.
Yeah, these are only city-sponsored workshops. We're not talking about a port meeting or, any other agency that puts on meetings that the city can go to. That's an exception under the Brown Act. These are, just like the most recent, the Palm Avenue Master Plan. So Mr. Wade typically knows sometime in advance before he's going to have one of those meetings, or Mr. Levine on the street issues. So
I think what we've got is we've taken Mr. Hall's thing and kind of torn it apart a little bit here. Do we have any other thoughts? Because I think what we'd like is for Mr. Hall to listen to what we've said and try to come back with something that might meet at least 80% of everybody's desires.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a very difficult thing for you to do.
I know.
And maybe some examples of what other folks do in this, because it helps sometimes if they've experienced it.
And it will include the sort of minimal formality. If it happens to be that 3 of us want to go,
So be it.
Can we do that?
Okay. You have enough input?
I do, thank you.
Moving on to item 6.1, which is a combination of the city council action, the successor agency to the redevelopment agency. Mr. Wade. Oh, I've got Mr. Wade down there. Is it Mr. Levine? I'll give it to Mr. Hall. I don't,
sit over here.
I'd like to start off. I don't think that's me. Hope. And go through the alley topic as a construction project, and then turn it over to Greg to address the financing side of it. And then I think we'll be available for questions and try to mix the two items together as to respond to any questions you have. As you know, there was a policy that you approved regarding the selection of alley improvements. You gave us a direction to proceed with a selection process, which basically was the three department heads: public safety, public community development, public works, to independently look at the alleys that were dirt, currently dirt, and against a set of priorities that were in that policy, and then consolidate our listing and come up with a recommended list of alleys. And you also had a it wasn't a subcommittee, but you had the mayor and Mr. Bilbray also looking at how those alleys could be improved in different methods, and so that was done. And in your staff report, you saw that we identified 14 alleys that we collectively believe are the ones in most need, based on the priorities you gave us for improvement. And I portrayed those alleys on this map that you have in front of you in the following manner. If you look primarily to the right side of the map, you'll see those which are red with a yellow highlight behind them. There are 14 alleys, and the alleys are numbered. The alley numbering was that which you had back in 2006 when we did the alley design originally, which went to the voters for an assessment district. This is not considered as being brought to you as an assessment district, but as a project that would be funded through the city funds. We are proposing that all of the alleys, basically south of Elm, east of 9th, would be paved, with the exception of that one short piece you see there between Florida, just south of Elm, between Florida and I think that's 11th Street, Florida and 11th Street. The estimate that this would, for construction of those 14 alleys, is in the neighborhood of $1.2 million. And that estimate is based on the design that was presented to you all, or to this council, back in 2005, 2006. We can use the design that was prepared by the engineer at the time. But we'd have to refresh it, because it's been, what, 7 years, almost 8 years now, I guess, since we actually did the surveys and all of the design work. So we'd have to make sure that conditions that were existing then are still valid today, but we should be able to use a lot of what we've already done. The second item that would be different from what we did in 2006 presentation to you is that the alleys as they're designed now have a permeable concrete strip down the center, which was designed to take water that runs down the alleys and try to have it absorbed into the soil through the area below the permeable concrete. The municipal permit that the Regional Water Quality Control Board had us operating under in 2005 and 6 when those were built or designed has been revised, updated, and made more rigorous in terms of water discharge, such that these permeable strips down the center would not most likely meet the parameters of the regional permit. So the engineer would have to come up with a design that would accommodate this water runoff that meets the regional standards. Meets the regional board's requirements in our permit.
Can you hang on one sec, Mr. Levine?
Mr. Levine, just because you're on the water retention issue, we have an email in front of us that asks why that's become an issue. Can you explain? Is it state or federal, or is it just that we require it?
No, it's the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The permit, the MPDS permit. It's 09. Oh, I forget the number off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Some other regulatory body that's
but it's the Regional Water Quality Control Board stipulates that we have to infiltrate. We have to infiltrate a certain percentage of water. It's first 2 inches.
Levine, I think what Ms. Baylor asked, it's not the city's requirement.
No.
It is a requirement of a larger agency.
The Regional Water Quality Control Board.
I think all he was asking.
And if we don't meet that standard, then we can be subject to fines.
And I would just add that it's triggered by paving an area that is today pervious to water retention with a hard surface and of a certain size. It used to be 5,000 square feet or more, and I don't know what the new permit says, but anytime you're putting that much paving down that's going to harden the surface, you've got to filtrate it.
Yeah, well, anybody that has tried to dig a hole around IB knows that all we are hard pans, so we don't really retain any water anyway. So it's not very pervious soil anyway. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Does that same requirement hold if it's concrete or asphalt?
Yes.
Doesn't matter.
Does not matter. It's impervious that we're creating. So as part of the design, they would have to refreshing the drawings. They would have to come up with a method at which we'd infiltrate. And I'll give you one example that may be viable. When you approved, or this council approved, a Alley Assessment District 71, I think it was, which was that one block between 10th, Donix, 11th, and 10th. Elm, Donix, 11th, and 10th. There was a block that the residents asked to have paved. In that one, the engineer designed a pit below, at the low point in the alley, with a grate over the top of it, and then it goes down, I forget, like 6-8 feet, and then it runs laterally underneath the pavement, the pavement, into a gravel bed, and the water absorbs that. And from my observation, that has not been a problem. It hasn't plugged up. It hasn't overflowed. It has accommodated the water that's coming off that alley. So that's an option that might be designed into the alley.
Please.
But that would have to happen on each one of these alleys.
It would have to happen in each alley.
Maybe. That's what you're waiting for an engineer to tell you.
Well, there would have to be, we have to infiltrate the water on each alley in some manner, whether it's that method or some other method. We have to capture it and infiltrate it. I'd like to turn it over to Greg to talk about how the staff is proposing to fund these 14 alleys, alley improvements, alley pavings.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. And in January, when you adopted the policy that Mr. Levine was speaking about, the criteria under which these alleys were ranked for priority for improvement, you also adopted a resolution that approved the 5-year capital improvement program, a part of which was a 2-year implementation plan. At that time, you allocated, it was recommended by staff that $500,000 be allocated from the recently formed capital reserve for this project, which was supported by council but not authorized for expenditure. Council also authorized $50,000 of that money to be used for pre-engineering, updating the plans that Mr. Levine spoke of. Recently, because we are in our 3rd year or just beyond our 3rd year of the 2010 tax allocation bonds that were issued by the former redevelopment agency, we've been contacted by the trustee, Wells Fargo, requesting notification as to when we expect to finish the project. And by that, that has meant expend all the remaining bond funds. As you know, we had approximately $11.4 million of 2010 bond proceeds allocated to various projects, most of which is still allocated, some of which is still remaining. And the expenditure of those funds obviously was delayed by about 2 years because of the dissolution process, and we still have some of those funds remaining to be spent. As part of that notification, the trustee advised us that we still had $1.274 million of bond proceeds being held by the trustee, and the inquiry was whether or not we'd be requesting those funds for expenditure. And given that we're beyond the 3-year limit, we decided to go ahead and request those bond funds.
Explain the 3-year limit.
When you issue tax allocation bonds, there's a time frame within which the proceeds have to be expended, and it's typically a 3-year time frame. Now, there's no legal requirement really to do that. That's just an expectation that the bond holders have, that those proceeds are spent for the purposes for which the bonds were issued. And we still had some residual bonds, as you may remember from the 2003, that were also delayed quite a bit by the dissolution of redevelopment. But there's no real legal action that people take. But we have this trustee, because of the dissolution of redevelopment, they're actively seeking and asking us to complete the project. So again, there's no, in my view, there's no real legal ramification. But obviously, the more quickly we spend those bond proceeds, the better. And we're getting to expend those bond proceeds. The 1.3 million, roughly 1.27 million, was not, because it was being held by the trustee, was not included on any of our recognized obligation payment schedules for payment. Part of the dissolution process requires that when you allocate these bond proceeds to a project, it must be placed on a ROPS, and the oversight board approves. Well, the successor agency approves it, oversight board approves it, and then the Department of Finance has to approve it. We have received a finding of completion from the Department of Finance, and that's a key element of the dissolution process, because they are bonds issued in 2010 prior to January 1st, 2011, which is a statutory deadline. That is a key element of being able to expend those bond proceeds without a problem. We got a finding of completion saying, because we had completed the various steps of dissolution satisfactorily and successfully, that we could now spend any remaining 2000 bond proceeds for the purposes for which the bonds were sold, and in a manner consistent with the bond covenants. The bond covenants were quite specific in listing certain project categories, and one of those was streets and alleys, improvement of streets and alleys. Because we've received those $1.3 million now, we have received those funds, that because they have not been approved on a ROPS by the Department of Finance, we're recommending that the successor agency authorize us to place this project, the alley improvement project, on a ROPS for funding with 2010 bond proceeds. That would be the next ROPS, the ROPS 1415B, which is for the period of January 1st through June 30th of 2015. That ROPS is due to the Department of Finance by October 1st. Because we had originally, or the council had originally sought to fund this project from Strategic Capital Reserve, and because now we have these funds and we've been made aware that we have these funds, our recommendation is that we use these funds, because there is a timeline on the expense of this money, to use it for this project. It would dramatically increase the number of alleys that can be approved. It's bond money that has to be spent, and it's bond money that was intended for this very purpose. What we'd like to recommend is that because there's a delay effectively in getting the money and the funds approved by the DOF, although we firmly believe that that would be approved by the Department of Finance given our finding of completion and the fact that these projects, or this type of project, was specified in the bond covenant. What we'd like to recommend is the council authorizes the city to proceed with the expense of $50,000 of the capital reserve to update the plans and prepare the bid specs for putting the project out to bid. We also recommend that we spend an additional amount of funds, up to roughly $200,000, to facilitate the preparation of those plans and the bid documents, because it will be more than $50,000 given the number of alleys that now we have to, that we're hopeful we can improve. Our recommendation would be that we place this item on the ROPS, and once approved, refund the Strategic Capital Reserve with the bond funds, all but the $50,000 that was already authorized by the council from the Strategic Reserve, so that we would essentially pay back that reserve to keep that reserve flush and use these bond funds, $1.274 million plus the $50,000 of the Strategic Capital Reserve for the project. So it would somewhat be a retroactive reimbursement, and even in the unlikely, and I have to stress that it's unlikely because we've gotten every blessing to spend this money for this purpose, the event that somehow we weren't able to use the bond funds, we would at least be in a position to have prepared the bid package, prepared all the plans, we'd have the project ready to go, and we could at that time in January of 2015 advise the council as to what our recommendation would be. But again, given the finding of completion, given the fact that this money has to be spent, and given the fact that this very type of project was covered in the bond covenants, we believe firmly that the DOF would approve this upon recommendation by the successor agency and oversight board. And that's our recommendation. If you have any questions about the financing part of it, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
Thank you. Mr. Spriggs?
Thank you, Mr. Wade. I do have a couple of questions about financing and the reserves. First, we have some funds that have come back to the city from the original redevelopment agency loan, and are those going into the Strategic Capital Reserve, or where are those going? That's the first question.
Yeah, we actually received those funds this week, and the council will have to appropriate those. Until they're appropriated to any specific location, they simply will be unassigned fund balance in the general fund.
I see. Thanks. So I think this is, we've been on this path of getting the alleys paved. I think it's the plan seems to make sense. I'm concerned about the fund source for doing this. I think it's the bond proceeds are the right source, but the backup source of the Strategic Capital Reserve, I think I have some concerns about. I had thought that when we were doing the reserves in possibly our second meeting, when we were talking about what appropriate projects for different of our categories of reserves, that we had decided, I'm not sure whether it was a vote or not, but I thought we had a pretty clear decision that streets and alleys would be from gas tax, and what's that other fund that's Sandag related?
Transnet.
Transnet funds, and that we had made the decision to do streets and alleys from that fund rather than the Strategic Capital Reserve Fund, because that's really directly related to the Transnet and the gas tax uses. And we had discussed the Strategic Capital Reserve Fund as an investment type of fund that we would put into the kinds of projects where we expected public-private partnerships or some other return to the city in terms of increased sales tax or supporting business investment, like I said, public-private partnerships, joint ventures, whatever. So that's my recollection of the discussion and what we had at least had a consensus on what these reserve funds ought to be used for. And while I'm as confident as you guys, you gentlemen are, that we're going to get this money back through the ROPS process, it just seems to me that it's setting the wrong precedent to use the investment fund, the Strategic Capital Reserve Fund, to front-end these costs, and that's inconsistent with an earlier discussion we had about the appropriate use of the Strategic Capital Reserve Fund, and that we ought to be using Transnet and gas tax funds instead. And that's really the only comment that I have on this.
Maybe I can comment a little bit. The Transnet and gas tax monies are actually, we receive them from Sandag, and following that paper trail may get very complicated. So what we might want to do is, rather than follow the money that way through another agency, use the money that we're receiving on the loan repayment as the initial upfront for allowing this work to proceed, thus preserving the strategic capital. I think trying to repay, if you will, the Transnet and the gas tax would be problematic because it would have to go back into the coffers of Sandag, and that would be problematic, I believe. So perhaps maybe what we should do is identify that $200,000 or $150,000 from the money that we're getting from the loan repayment from the DOF.
Can I ask something here? I'm reading the staff report, and when we first said we were going to go for the proposed alleys, and we took a vote on this in a resolution, we said that $500,000 was coming from new Strategic Capital Improvement General Fund Reserve. That's what this council said we were going to do. We now have an opportunity of leveraging this bond proceed money to do a project that's a little bit bigger scope. I think we're getting caught up in the fact that we as a council said we were going to spend $500,000 on alleys, and now, if anything, we're probably not even going to spend $200,000 out of that same thing. I don't think we're differing from it. Whether we take and figure out, when we decide to figure out what we're doing with the repayment of the general fund loan, we have to also remember that was carried on our books as a receivable. If you look back in those budgets, that $3.7 million, it was there. We just didn't ever expect to see it, but we had it as an obligation coming back. I don't want to get into what we're doing with that return money until we know exactly where we looked at it in the full budget. But I mean, we actually committed as a council to spend $500,000. What the staff has done is found a lot more money elsewhere that has been really kind of said that it was going to be spent on streets and alleys, and I don't think that we're hurting ourselves here at all to just move forward with what staff's recommending. And hopefully, I mean, you're going to have the 1.27. Is that purely capital, or were you going to pay back some of this money with that thing once you got it released from the ROPS?
The 1.27 million would all go to the alley project, and
it would pay back the 200,000.
It would pay back 150,000 of the 200 back to the strategic reserve.
And so it comes back to us. It's just he wants us to give him money now to do the work.
Mr. Mayor, I'm 100% with you. We voted to put $500,000 against the alley project. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. It's the fund source that we modified the fund source when we had a discussion of this in connection with these different strategic reserves and their purposes. And I mean, I didn't bring all my notes and markups and everything, but we actually did, I thought, had a consensus, if not an agreement, that we would use the Strategic Capital Reserve Fund as an investment fund and not for general infrastructure of this type. So it's really just a question of the fund source. It's not a question of the purpose and the validity and the expectation of getting the money back. It's our own internal consistency with how we're using our reserves and making sure that we have that reserve for the things that the opportunities that come up for us to generate increased revenues to the city. So that's all that I'm saying. And you know, like I said, I can pull out my notes. I don't know whether the city clerk has the minutes from that meeting, but it was pretty clear that we had this discussion, and that gas tax and the other fund source that I forget right now were going to be more appropriate for the alley project. That $500,000, clearly $500,000 for the alley project from those fund sources. So that's all I'm saying, because there is a slight chance that staff mentions that if somehow this gets tied up, we're out that $200,000.
You're right.
You know, and then we have another $300,000 commitment that could still come out of the strategic capital reserve if we go back on what we had decided previously was the purpose of the strategic capital reserve. So that's all I'm saying, is we should stay true to that notion of it as an investment fund.
I think one of the key words you said was opportunity, and I think this is a great opportunity that we have at this moment. Not to go against you, but I think this is opportunity, and it seems like it's been spelled out pretty clearly that the funds will be returned at less $50,000, and sometimes we need to go back and look at the big picture. And big picture is we have a lot of citizens right now that are going to get a big benefit of alleys. And is there a little risk? Possibly. But it seems like opportunity is there now.
All that I'm saying is that we have the money in other reserves. It's readily available. If we pulled out the reserve report, there's probably $2 million in other sources that we just looked at about 6 months ago that were for this kind of purpose. It's not that we won't do the alleys. Of course we're going to do the alleys. There shouldn't really be any delay in that. It's just switching the fund source to another reserve account is all that I'm talking about. And staying true to the principle that we need to have a fund source in this town that can generate economic development. And otherwise, and that's one of the purposes I thought we had agreed for the strategic capital reserve. There are other fund sources to improve streets, improve sewers, etc. And so we won't cross-fund things from fund sources that are reserved for those purposes. That's really all that I'm saying. It's not that we wouldn't do it. The money is there. It's just in another fund, another bank account.
Wilbur, you said on the little ad hoc committee.
How many alleyways aren't paved in? Is it 30?
It is 30, sir.
30. The mayor and I went into, when we had this discussion before, I went into this meeting thinking that we might be able to do 1, 2, 5 most. We're getting almost half of them done. I mean, we need to jump on this as quickly as possible. As I somewhat agree with Mr. Spriggs about the funding, I also don't agree, because the fact is that Transnet and gas tax funds, you're taking from another street paving project. Is that these are just reserves? No, I mean, we could be potentially taken from another, a true street paving project.
That's correct.
They're not set against any project right now. There are reserve balances that we have not.
Gas tax is not a reserve.
project.
We're required to spend that in a certain amount of time. There is not a reserve to the gas tax.
There's a balance in the gas tax.
That's correct.
And there's a balance, an undesignated balance in both the gas tax and the Transnet funds. We just saw the tables on all these balances just, maybe 6-7 months ago.
But we
And
voted
those
we
are
voted to
substantial balances.
spend we voted to spend strategic capital improvement things. We as a council voted to do that for this project. We're not even going to spend a tenth of it if everything works out of what we planned on.
And and I don't believe we voted to spend. I think we changed that designated use from strategic capital reserve to transnet funds for the alley project. That's the point of fact here. I think that
I don't think so, but I mean,
yeah.
My thing is that if you get into street repairs and we forget the fact that alleys or whatever it is, the amount of money we get between Transnet and gas tax does not meet the requirements of the city of Imperial Beach. We looking forward to have to go even one step forward. If the city does as well as I anticipate Mr. Hall has indicated, and we end up with a little bit of money going into our reserves at the end of the fiscal year, is not near enough to keep up with the public infrastructure requirements of the city of Imperial Beach. We saw that before. The estimates say that we have to spend almost $1.5 million. If you look at our normal general fund budget, we do not set aside any money for capital improvements. What we're doing now is the fact that we've been very conservative on some of our things, and we have some reserves that we want to use and spend on. But when it comes to public infrastructure, in the future, near term and long term, the city of Imperial Beach is going to have to figure out how it maintains that infrastructure, because we don't have in our present budget system a means of replenishing and keeping up with just the streets and roads, much less the rest of the city infrastructure. I mean, it's gas tax and Prop A Transnet money does not even come to $1 million a year for the city of Imperial Beach.
All I'm saying, Mr. Mayor, and I think there's been some search for the minutes and that sort of thing. All that I'm saying is that there are balances in those funds that we had talked about using for alleys, for this alley project. And your point is a good one about whether we have, without redevelopment money coming in, whether we have the resources to pave our streets and alleys in the future going forward. And my point is that the Strategic Capital Reserve Fund is a way for the city to ensure that we have the right kind of development that generates the sales and other tax revenue that we need going forward. Every city has to have some sort of plan for future investments in income generating activities. And we don't have the plan, but we have the fund. I'm hoping that pretty soon we will have an economic development plan or strategy that will make it clear why we need a strategic capital reserve fund, just like every other city that wants to have the ability to invest in projects that are going to generate the kind of income that we need in order to provide the services that our residents require. And so, you know, as long as we have the right fund source for this, we shouldn't use the investment fund for it. That's all that I'm saying. We need to be disciplined about keeping money in our bank, our piggy bank, that we use for income generating investments. And once we start breaking that piggy bank for that purpose and using it for other purposes, then we lose the ability to take advantage of investment opportunities that are going to produce a return to the city. So that's why we shouldn't touch the Strategic Capital Reserve.
Right.
Thank you. Mr. Spriggs, as always, you're very passionate about that fund. But we will repay ours once we tap into our piggy bank. I think the way Mr. Wade has explained it, all of that will be paid back. We're all in agreement. This alley project is something, Mr. Mayor, you and I have been working, Mr. Bilbert, all of us have been working on these alleys for a very long time. To see this project getting closer and closer to fruition in my lifetime is exciting to me. I have a totally different question, and I do appreciate your passion on this. And you have always been just a constant advocate for our balances and creating funds that will spur economic development, and I appreciate that. My question is, though, and we have included in our staff report, we did receive some mail from some people in the community. This project is based on concrete paving and not asphalt. Is there a reason why? Because I think myself, I wondered and I thought that if we used asphalt, we would, to use the mayor's term, get more bang for our buck. Is there a reason why we're not looking at asphalt at all? Can you speak to that, Mr. Levine?
It's from my perspective, it's a maintenance issue. You either spend the money now, or you're going to spend it later when in maintenance for the alleys. If it's asphalt, and you've got the resources now to do nearly half of them, and to do it where those alleys are going to last decades. You put asphalt in those alleys with the trash trucks going down them, people accessing their yards or garages from it, you're going to end up with maintenance in 20, 25 years, or sometimes less, depending upon circumstances. They're not, these alleys, if you're asphalt, are not bumped up against curbs and gutters. They're bumped up against dirt, so when people drive off of them, they're going to, have the good possibility of chipping and breaking, and the maintenance that goes with them. See that on our streets right now. You certainly have that option to do that. You could do probably a third more alleys if you did that, but you're then just pushing the costs in the future years.
Is there an opportunity to do both? Could some alleys be concrete and alleys that were not in those situations that were prone to being more tore up, if you will, from use? Could we look at doing both applications of concrete and asphalt?
Councilwoman Bragg, if I can just jump in a little bit. When I was at ICSC, I had a chance to talk to a consultant about the difference of using asphalt and concrete, and he had used both. He happened to be from Newport Beach, so he was familiar with the beach environment and some of the challenges we'll face. Essentially, by the time you protect the asphalt correctly by putting in curb gutter and whatnot to do it correctly, the cost of putting in concrete and the cost of putting in asphalt is going to be very, very close. The difference is going to be maintenance over a long period of time. I'll be the first one to admit that I asked Mr. Levine to look into asphalt, see if we could stretch our money further and go a little bit further. I spent quite a bit of time with him. I would suggest certainly we'll have our engineer look at this when we do our final engineering and make sure that we're spending our money in the most appropriate way. But his suggestion to me was that we'll be happier certainly with concrete than we are with asphalt, unless one of the big challenges we have is that we don't have the proper road base under here, so we'd have to put in a lot of road base and then the asphalt, where concrete you can do pretty much on the existing condition of the soil. So again, I think it's important that we make sure that as we update our engineering here, that we tell the engineer we're trying to do this in the most cost-effective way possible. And if there are sections of this or particular locations that asphalt would be appropriate and cheaper, then we want to do it that way. We want to do it in the most cost-effective way for both initial installation as well as long-term maintenance. And don't tie their hands to one product or the other, but make sure that we let them know we're trying to look at the most cost-effective way of doing this.
Mr. Hall, I really appreciate your due diligence on this issue, because that consideration every time we've talked about alleys has been brought up. So thank you for taking the time when you were on your conference to really delve into it. It answers the question, and that's, I just want our community to really understand that we did look at this and we feel that wholeheartedly this is the best way to go. So thank Mr. Levine, you as well. Thank you.
And maybe just to add some confusion to what you were talking about earlier, I think where we get a little bit confused is we actually have two Public Works Reserve funds. One is strategic, and one is the Public Works Capital Reserve. I think we're confident enough as staff, and both of those funds are established to accomplish similar things. if it makes all of the council members feel more comfortable, I have no problem suggesting to Mr. Levine that we would take the $150,000 out of the Public Works Capital Reserve rather than the Strategic Reserve. I don't think that issue is worth having an argument over, because I think we're confident we're going to get it back. Plus, both of those funds are essentially set up that either one of them could be used for that purpose. So if that makes the council feel more comfortable, I think we all agree we want to have a fund set aside for strategic opportunities as they come along. And we can change the funding source on that if that moves us forward. I think that's a very appropriate discussion, and we can do that.
Is there enough money in?
Yes.
Okay.
Just like to make a comment about the amount of alleyways that we're doing. I guess every other alleyway in the city has been paved by paid for by the expense of the property owners in the city. So the fact that we're doing this, I know we're going to get a little bit of flack from at least one in the audience right now, and luckily the other Bill Bray's not here. We'd be hearing from him too, and my family actually owns property on an unpaved alleyway, so I don't think that we're trying to do favorites in here. That's why we set this policy aside. But on that matter, I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution number 2014-7492.
Second that motion.
Can we do that with the fund source change?
I'm not willing to make that change.
Why not? I mean, it's
because
the
I
money
think
is
that
there
we
either
voted
way.
already once to spend that money. And maybe your recollection says that we wanted to use that money for something else. When we took that action, we knew what we were doing. We said we were going to spend that. Now to back off and said we changed our mind because we think there's something else there, I don't agree with that. And that's really where I'm coming from. When we took that action, 2014-74, well, no, it's not this one. I was looking at this staff report. When we took that action back in January, we said we were going to spend it from that particular pot of money. And I think that we can't go around changing every time something else changes that much. I just don't believe in it.
That's not very much of a change, Mr. Mayor. And like the city manager said, the funds are available from a fund source where there is exactly the appropriate use intended right here. So it probably isn't going to matter much, except as a matter of principle of how we designate these funds for different purposes. And if we designate them for an investment purpose or returns on investment, we ought to stick with that. And that's the discussion that we had. I have a different recollection entirely of our discussion about these different fund reserves and what we were using them for, and specifically discussed and made the point, and I thought we had council concurrence, that we were not going to spend strategic capital reserve funds on the alley project. Now, if you're saying you're reading a resolution where it says strategic capital reserves is what we agreed to,
we agreed
then,
to it, and
then
that was
okay.
the one when we had the full discussion on capital improvement projects that included many things, and that's what we took action on and said to the staff that these are the things that we wanted accomplished in this cycle here, and we designated where the money was coming from, whether it be alleys or anything else that we had going at that time. If since then we have come about and said that we want to say from now on we want to keep these particular funds for this thing, that is after the fact of what we took action on back in January. That's the only reason I'm sticking with what we did back in January.
Mr. Mayor, is there a time essence on this? Can we bring this back at our next meeting with the minutes from that meeting where we can all agree on what occurred at that meeting? You have a recollection of it. You have a recollection of it. I would, if we could bring it back.
There were actually 2 meetings. I think that might be what's causing the confusion. If you'll remember, the first time we came to the council, what was on the request was that we would appropriate $500,000 for the alleys. That didn't happen. The city council asked us to come back with smaller amounts that we would expend getting ready for some of these projects. If you remember, I think there was some request that you allow the city manager to spend the funds as the projects are ready to go, and you said, well, wait a minute. Let's bring this back with $50,000 to start with. that 50,000 to start with was actually identified out of the gas tax money to do some of the original. So I guess I'm saying you're both right. The $500,000 was allocated from strategic capital, but the council decided they didn't want to allocate all 500,000 to begin with. They only wanted to allocate 50,000 to begin with.
Well, in that case, if the maker of the motion is willing to change it to take the money from wherever the city manager wants it to come from to make anybody happy, I think the real point, we were going to do 14 alleys, over almost 50% of them. I guess we lost that point. That was for the people of Imperial Beach, and I don't care what we do with the rest of it. So, Mr. Bilbray, if you wanted to modify your motion, I'd be willing to support that.
I'll modify it just to appease everyone, I guess. But as as I see this capital improvement general fund, or I see it as an investment. You're saying that it's an investment in our city. Well, I see this as an investment in our neighborhoods. I think this is exactly where we should be using the funds from. Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bilbray, for amending your motion.
Second amendment. So we have before us a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
We now move on to the successor agent, which is the resolution SA 1442, conditionally authorizing the allocation of the 1.274 of the 210 tax allocation bond proceeds for the alley improvement project, subject to placement on the project on the ROPS. And a second, could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
We now have items 2.4 and I think it was 2.5 and 2.6. Ms. Unger, we did take those at the end because we heard you were on your way here, and they kind of lead into letting you be able to speak to what you wanted to without having a separate item for you or whatever it was. So I don't think we need a staff report unless anybody wants that, but Ms. Unger, I invite you to come up and tell us how we're doing.
Thank you for waiting for me. Sorry. I just wanted to give you guys an update on where we're at with the fireworks. As of yesterday, we have raised $13,233. That is not including money from our t-shirt sales, $20. I have all your sizes.
You're such a good.
The blue is on back order. We've already sold out, so I do have the white available. Let's see. The cans are all out. We have 35 cans actively out in the community right now. We do have 60 cans, but some of them have already been removed, like the 7-Eleven. Somebody stole one already, so he wanted them chained to the counter, and I didn't know how to do that, so he just removed them.
Because you brought up the cans, I've talked to two of the folks that have the cans. They really would like you to come pick up parts of those. They don't.
I pick them up every Sunday.
Okay, because I think some of them weren't aware. You know, it's not always the same employee. But I mean, the thing is, they're worried about things like that.
Yeah.
So as long as you have a schedule to go out there and do it.
Yeah, most of them know that the ones I haven't picked up were the VFW, and I only do the fleets on Thursday because we have meetings there.
I think it was more the storefront ones. That, you know,
okay.
They want to
pick them up
protect
every Sunday.
They want to protect what you're doing.
I swap them out so that I can get a count and get it turned into Doug Bradley's office and into the account to show some, growth. The cans are only netting about $100 a week, which isn't very good, but we've learned that if you walk around with the can, you can make $100 in an hour. So if any of you would like to walk your neighborhoods, I will gladly walk with you an hour of your time, knock on neighbors' doors, pass the can around. Maybe we could pass it to the next neighborhood. Whatever we got to do. It's crunch time and I'm getting nervous. T-shirt sales are bringing in about $1,000, so that's not included in the $13,000. Also, let's see, the fundraiser. We're having a fundraiser at C180 on June 23rd from 5 to 9. You have to call and make a reservation. You also have to present our flyer, which I brought for you guys, and I'll give it to you when I find it. You have to present the flyer to your waitress, and she will take 15% of your total bill, and that will go to us. So I don't know if we'll get that money before the 4th of July because it is on June 23rd, and it takes a few weeks to process how much money we made. But I'm asking that if you have any dignitary friends, or maybe if we could get the mayor to send a letter to some of the, people from the port or other mayors to come and help us raise money, that would be greatly appreciated. 15%. June 23rd. Don't forget. You can find the flyers at iheartib.com. I'll give one to Ed to put on the city's website, and they can print them from there. I think that's about it. Any questions?
Yeah. Do we have any questions?
No, I've had some grandiose plans, what I've been doing with my kids, and finishing up the school year. I was thinking, giving it to my wife's friends, and let her kids hit their neighborhoods up and down
Kids
the street.
work good.
Yeah, kids are always good, right? Because people open the door for a kid.
Yes, they do.
And
you have strollers. If
right.
you have a stroller, I'm telling you.
Right. Okay.
I've done some research.
So,
strollers work.
So I still have my can. It will have some money in it for you.
Okay, good.
And we'll get that to you. And I will take an XL blue. I'll just put one in order.
Got it.
Please.
Got it. Anybody else want to place an order while I'm here? Okay. You can send me an email, or I'll catch you in the parking lot. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you. So then, and with 2.5 and 2.6, we have two resolutions. We'll take them separately. On 2.5 was adopt resolution 2014-7490 to work with the tin fish at the end. We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
And under 2.6, we have resolution 2014-7489 to actually buy some fireworks. A motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
That concludes our meeting. Thank you all for coming.